Every Doctor Who story must have a monster. That's not an opinion, as it much is a statement of rather bizarre fact. If we look back on the previous 33 episodes of the new series, every single story had some manner of monster, whether it's some hideous alien beast or a hulking invasion force. Most of the time, such beasts are at the very crux of the storytelling. For instance, you can't tell a Dalek story without a Dalek after all. Or at the very least, a reasonable byproduct of the storytelling, as with the gas-marked zombies and the empty child Doctor dances, or the possessed dude in the Impossible Planet in the Satan Pit. But sometimes the presence of the monster is largely gratuitous, an easy way of upping the tension and filling out the episode's running time. Gridlock, for instance, never really offered a proper explanation as to how the Macra got into the New York highway, as their presence had nothing to do with the story's central mystery of the eternal traffic jam. But the story needed a good pre-credit scare and a more visceral peril for the stranded Martha, so in the Macra went. Whether dramatic gaps in that story were being filled by a mindless monster is debatable, but let's not forget the old saying, when you have a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. And honestly, monsters like the Macra, the Reapers in Father's Day, or even the Pigmen in last week's two-parter may be gratuitous, but they're not so important as to detract from the central story. How then do we deal with an episode like the Lazarus experiment, in which the daft gratuitous monster is the actual story? If this episode is about anything, it's about the dangerous allure of immortality, and the harm that can be done by those who value nothing but scientific advancement and personal glorification. In Professor Richard Lazarus, writer Stephen Greenhorn creates a compelling representation of this viewpoint, and Mark Gatiss, who becomes the third Doctor Who writer to also appear on the show, though the first to do so in a starring role, crafts a beautifully nuanced performance, one that presents both villainy and vulnerability in equal measure. That's a promising scenario, and I'm not at all convinced that the best way to explore that setup is to turn Lazarus into a gigantic scorpion-like beast that feeds on people's life energy, whatever that is. Best of it, we're supposed to believe that this derives from human genes. Mental. I can understand the challenge that faced Greenhorn and the production team. Yes, the issues raised by Greenhorn's script have the potential to be thought-provoking. The quest for immortality is one of the great mad science standbys, and the Doctor's status as a centuries-old regenerating alien gives him a unique perspective on the matter. There's a philosophical tension in having the Doctor condemn Lazarus' attempt to hold back death when he in himself is effectively incapable of dying of old age. And the episode occasionally leads into that tension. The Doctor claims that immortality is a curse, but that isn't necessarily how he always feels. The great boon of eternal life is that it gives the Doctor plenty of time to get over his sadness and regret. The loss of Rose has left him in a melancholy place, but that's nothing compared to his post-Time War trauma, and we saw him work through most of his angst over the past two series. Those are all ideas worth exploring, but to do so would require this to be one hell of a talky, exposition-heavy episode. The revived Doctor Who doesn't generally turn episodes over to lengthy ethical arguments. The very offbeat and experimental Boomtown comes the closest, but even that episode's famed diner scene takes up less than 5 minutes. The high point of the Lazarus experiment comes in the cathedral, as the Doctor and Lazarus argue over the value of a single life. Gatiss allows us viewers little moments in which we think we might see the good in him, but then he invariably disappoints. Lazarus is an unrepentant narcissist, a man so convinced of his own godlike infallibility that he insists on calling his hideous transformation a sign of progress. The man can't possibly believe that such a monster would represent the future of humanity, but even if he is that monster, he's willing to make an exception. Lazarus' fear of death is so insane, so pathological that he believes even this hideous mutant constitutes a triumph. As he proudly claims, he has gone further in the pursuit of immortality than any other human, and that enough justifies all the carnage that has led him to that point. Again, this makes for a great few minutes of dialogue between David Tennant and Mark Gatiss, but the episode needs some way to externalise its finer, more abstract points, some way to expand the story to 45 minutes and meet their runtime, and that's why the giant scorpion is required. It's just that this is a particularly square peg being jammed in an exceedingly round hole. It's not the concept of the scorpion that is ridiculous. I mean, it absolutely is, to the point that I'm not actually sure where I begin pointing out its ludicrousness. But the Carryonites and the Shakespeare Code were no less ridiculous. The difference there was the entire story was built around the power of words, and the Shakespeare-focused story is the natural place to include some Macbeth-inspired witches. The internal logic of the Carryonites wasn't flawless, but it roughly made sense, and it tracked well with the story's thematic concerns. I could have done without the cackling and the broomstick, but that didn't break the episodes, and it's beside the point. For its part, the Lazarus Scorpion could make sense if the story were more specifically about the perils of genetic engineering, or something. but it's an uneasy fit with a story about a prolonging life. Perhaps the Lazarus experiment does need a monster, but I wouldn't say it needs this monster, especially if Mark Gatiss makes a human Lazarus far more intimidating and intriguing anyway. The one great advantage of such an intimidating threat is that it gives Martha a chance to play the hero alongside the Doctor, even if she does so over the fierce objections of her mother. As we reach the midpoint of Martha's season, even if she only technically becomes a companion at the end of the episode, it's worth taking stock of where she stands. This episode reaffirms the impression of her we got back in Smith and Jones, as Martha proves a cool, competent psychic for the Doctor. Like any good companion, she knows which the Doctor's orders to follow and which to ignore, and she takes the lead in getting everyone out of the building while the Scorpion is on the warpath. Her willingness to act as the bait for Lazarus in the climax is tremendous proof of bravery, and it's nice that her sister Tish also takes a chance to redeem herself after that regrettable business in which she considered romancing the revived Lazarus. If there's a flaw with Martha, it's that she reads a little too much like a prefabricated companion. The first series of the new series spent a lot of time developing Rose. That season arguably made natural qualities that made her worthy of the Doctor's trip of a lifetime. But she needed the experience of the TARDIS to help her move beyond her previously aimless existence. Understandably, Doctor Who doesn't want to repeat all those same character beats with Martha, so it wisely positioned itself as someone further along in development. As a medical student, and the only sane person in the Jones clan, Martha is pretty competent before she meets the Doctor. And that's good because the Doctor is prepared to show her the universe, but he quite explicitly keeps her at arm's length. He isn't interested in engaging with her and helping her become a better person like he did with Rose. The result is a relationship between Doctor and companion that is far shallower than the last such pairing, but one that is arguably stronger for it. I don't necessarily mean to compare Martha to Rose here, but this isn't really about the inherent characters or how either is portrayed. Indeed, a decent chunk of the second series episodes didn't really have much to say about Rose, leaning instead on the character's previously established backstory. The whole point of the third series so far has been about how there isn't a spark between the Doctor and Martha, despite the fact that Martha clearly has some skills as a companion and is totally into him. All this should reflect negatively on the Doctor, but he's so unquestionably the show's hero that this doesn't really land properly. All this matters only if the development of the Doctor-companion relationship is a priority for the viewer, and I'll admit that generally speaking, I'm enough of an old-school fan that Doctor and Martha's relationship works fine as it is. But the new series has made a point of saying that this relationship doesn't matter. At the season's midpoint, Martha works fine as a character in isolation, but neither the Doctor nor Doctor Who is entirely prepared to admit it. Martha is certainly a damn finer companion than Rose, that's for sure, however. Overall, I'd simply sum this episode as extremely tedious and just boring at best. This is far from one of my favourites, and the entire concept is essentially fundamentally flawed. And how are we supposed to believe that the fluctuation of Lazarus' DNA is locked away in human genes? I mean, really? Although this episode is quite boring, it doesn't actively upset me like some of the episodes I can cite that do. Nevertheless, I give the Lazarus experiment a 4 out of 10.